Good morning, everyone. My name is Liam Flood, and I am a member of the Analyst and Associate Board. This program is under the umbrella of FEI Chicago Financial Executives International, and our role as A&AB is to connect young professionals and recent graduates of college to experienced financial professionals all across the different facets of finance. So that could be your comptrollers, your investment bankers, your M&A professionals. And one of those professionals that I have today with me is Stephen Brown. Thank you for joining us, Steve. He is a president at Stratego Partners, and I would like to welcome him now. Thank you for joining us, Steve.
Thanks for having me, Liam.
So, Steve, I want to kick this off, and I want to give you the floor here. Would you mind starting off by talking about yourself a little bit, your background, and what Stratego Partners is?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. My background is I went to undergraduate, got my degree at Johns Hopkins University, came out to Chicago to get my MBA at the University of Chicago, and have been here since. Started my professional career at KPMG, which at that point in time, back in the mid to late 70s, was known as Pete Marwick. And there's been multiple iterations of the major accounting firms from the 70s through today, where now there's basically 4 big ones and then another tier of another 4 or so. Left KPMG after 6 years to go to work for one of my clients as its CFO. It was a computer software developer back in 1983, and we were developing computer programs for basically for Microsoft and also for what was then the personal computer, most primarily the IBM personal computer. Had 5 CFO, COO gigs between 1983 and 2001. My last gig was also a technology business. It was a internet-based and internet-enabled company back during the dot-com era. We raised $4.9 million of angel money. That was the good news. The bad news was we didn't have any institutional investors in late 2001 when we needed follow-on funding. And so we ended up having to close our doors in late 2001 and early 2002. And at that point in time, I thought about what I really wanted to do next. And if I was going to be in a position to do my own thing, that was sort of the time to do it. And I hatched the idea for Stratego Partners. Most CFOs and COOs like to either buy companies, sell companies, or figure out how to save money. The challenge is they've got their day job to do, which is managing people and getting reports out and all of those kinds of things. So I thought, boy, wouldn't it be nice if I could do what I really like doing for the bulk of my day? And so thinking about either mergers and acquisition activity and services, or figuring out how to do cost saving strategy work for clients sort of came to mind. And there were a lot of people out there doing M&A activity, and I really didn't know anybody who was doing cost saving strategy, especially the way I wanted to and with the client service model that I had in mind. So I picked cost saving strategy work, and Stratego was hatched in July of 2002, and I've been doing it and learning more and more about cost saving strategies and execution over the last 18 years. And it's literally a life learning process. So we learn different tricks and tips and methods to figure out how to save our clients money. And that brings me up to to today. So been working at, I founded Stratego in July of 2002, and we've been figuring out how to save clients money from 2002 till today, and we can do it for many, many, many years to come.
We talked a little bit prior to this, and I think your background is very fascinating. It's very experienced, especially in C-suite level positions. And as you touched on just now, you also work with a lot of C-suite individuals. And something we also kind of talked about prior to this was something that you hold kind of near and dear to your professional experience is stop managing and start leading. So as you've kind of come about through the past 18, 19 years at Stratego and then your own professional background in C-suite, what kind of leadership skills, successful leadership skills, have you seen maybe that's with your clients while working at Stratego, or maybe it's Fortune 500 companies that you see today that you think are really pertinent and necessary for the future leaders of the business world?
Great question, Liam. My sense is that the skills that were important looking backwards are also really important going forwards. And even in a in-person environment pre-COVID to a virtual environment, there's still a lot of the same skills are applicable. You just are working in a different environment. So let me just throw out several, and I'll let you kind of, home in on the things you might want to talk a little bit more about. So the important things for leaders are to lead and not manage. Great leaders lead, they inspire, they don't manage, and they certainly don't micromanage their teams or their organizations. When leaders are managing, they're not doing their job of leading, and other people are responsible. So from the leader's perspective, the most important thing for them to do is pick the right people to fill the seats in their direct reports and make sure their direct reports do the same throughout their organizations within the organization. If you've got the right people at the company in the right seats, you got a really good shot at winning. And if you have wrong people at key seats, you're going to be extremely dysfunctional, and it's going to be really, really hard. Leaders need to be decisive. That doesn't mean to be reckless, but be decisive. They need to ask the questions. They need to review the data and the information. And then they need to be, their job is to make decisions. And they need to develop consensus around that. But when a decision is made, everybody's got to kind of fall in. And the leader needs to then, again, lead, make sure everybody knows what they're doing, why they're doing it. And again, it goes back to if you've got the right people in the seats, you're going to be in great shape. They need to be really, really insistent on developing the right company culture. A lot of people talk about bottom up versus top down. Culture is a top down kind of thing. As a matter of fact, there's a lot that's top down. You don't need to, again, don't manage it. You've got to lead and inspire people. But it's top down from a culture perspective. And the leader has to, there's the term walk the walk. The leader has to walk the walk. The second the leader is doing things that are expecting everybody else to do, the whole culture breaks down. So responsible for culture, and then you gotta lead it. The leaders got to provide resources to people to get the job done. So it's not that they have to do the job, but they've got to, again, have the right people in the right spots. They've got to mentor those people, and they've got to provide the resources so that they can get the job done successfully. Leaders need to ask great questions. They may know the answers, but they can't. If they know the answers and they tell everybody the answers, then they're managing. They need to ask the questions to make their people think and think strategically, and they need to develop that strategic thinking throughout the organization. And then the other thing from a culture perspective, leaders need to celebrate employee successes. They need to be right out there doing that. There's nothing more important to a workforce than knowing that their leader knows what's going on. They recognize when good things are happening, and they give kudos around the horn. They also, the flip side of that, and this is going to sound a little counterintuitive, but they also need to enable and even celebrate failure. By doing that, they allow people to make mistakes, and that creates the culture where people will try harder, and they'll be willing to, be decisive when they might not otherwise be decisive, because they're not going to get hammered for making a wrong decision. That doesn't mean that you make a reckless decision. It means make good decisions based on the information and the data that's available. Ask the good questions, be decisive, but you're not going to be right all the time. You can't always be right. And if somebody's waiting to be right, then they're not going to be making enough decisions to help the organization really move forward strategically.
You packed a lot of information in there, and I agree with a lot of what you said. Two things I think that are pretty important, and they kind of relate to what's going on in today's world, is you talked about decisiveness out of strong leaders and enabling failure. And I think for some viewers, they'll hear this, they'll see this, and they'll be like, enabling failure. I thought I'm supposed to be great at my job, and I think enabling failure kind of ties into that enabling strategic and critical thinking, and being able to teach instead of manage is very important, I think, for a successful workplace, and especially nowadays, tying back into the decisiveness aspect. These past 10 months, as you well know, have been quite the storm, and a lot of businesses really struggled, and I think we saw a lot of successful, not even in the financial realm, but businesses across industries. The successful ones kind of had leaders that embodied a lot of these qualities that you have, or that you just described, as well as you have as well. So one thing I'd like to ask you is, what have you kind of seen with your clients, or maybe just, again, going back to maybe across industries in general that you've noticed, what kind of strategies that you've seen, maybe in cost savings, or maybe in leadership, that you've maybe seen introduced by clients, maybe post-COVID than pre-COVID?
So from the cost saving side, there's been a significant impact on travel costs, obviously. I think some of that is going to continue. People are going to question, do I really need to get on the plane to go see the customer? And that's not to say that you can completely avoid face-to-face contact and interaction. I think that's important, but now we've got a basis for determining, is it really necessary to make a trip once a month to see a customer? Can we use technology, and can we be maybe even more in touch virtually, and then cut the number of actual hop on a plane and go out and visit face-to-face to once a quarter? The one thing you need to figure out is, what do you need to do that's face-to-face, either with a customer, with a supplier, even with your own people? Are there a lot of things that you can do in a remote virtual environment as opposed to having to be face-to-face? I think a lot of companies believed, and I think a lot of the senior leadership team believed, that people had to be in the office. That's how you knew that they were working. And I'll go back to what I said earlier about leaders, and that is they need to hire the right people, and the right people will get the job done, whether they're in an office next to you or they're working from home. They're going to be committed to that. And by the way, if they're not, and you've got a remote work at home kind of environment that's been established, they're not getting the job done. The second job of the leader is when you miss the first one, which is hire the right people, is when you make that mistake, you've got to fix it. You've got to get rid of that person and replace them with the right people. It's unbelievably important to have the right people in the right seats all the time. And the good leaders, when they realize that somebody's not right, they take the appropriate corrective action. So those things, even in a remote world, and it goes to your customers and your suppliers, how many of the meetings that you do, and even your weekly meeting with your staff, how many of those really need to be face-to-face, and can we get by with doing the face-to-face when we really have an urgent either challenge, problem, opportunity that we're trying to deal with, where face-to-face interaction is really, really important. And then do the basic stuff, virtually. People are much, if you can cut out an hour of commuting to and from work, or if you're in sales, if instead of being, having 4 meetings a day for an hour with a half hour of travel, to and from the meeting, if you didn't have to do the travel to and from the meeting, you could pack in 6 meetings in the day. And so you can be much more efficient in a virtual world. And I think companies are going to need to figure out how do they blend that face-to-face interaction, determine when it's absolutely necessary, and then from a strategic standpoint, do the face-to-face when it's necessary or urgent. And for the more just typical, catch-up meetings, staff meetings, status meetings, maybe make them virtual, even if you're in your own commercial space, because just getting people out of their office, they come into a conference room, there's chit chat going on, there's all kinds of things. You will be much more efficient in a virtual world. But you also have to make sure that you're doing your meetings in the most efficient and effective way, and that goes for either in person or virtual. So you've got real estate costs that are going to be significantly different going forward. There's going to be some blending of the remote virtual work environment and the in-person, commercial real estate environment. And I think footprints are going to get smaller, which is going to save money on real estate. And so I think from a real estate perspective, you need to determine how are we going to do that? Is that going to be, instead of everybody having their own workstation and office, is it going to be a hoteling kind of situation? And companies and senior leadership teams, I think pre-COVID, were really hesitant to make that choice because they were worried that they weren't going to be productive and efficient and all of that. They found out that they can be that. And so there's certain things strategically from a pure cost structure that are going to be changing going forward that are going to have dramatic impacts on cost.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with you again on a lot of this. I would say a lot of businesses kind of came out with some positives from this pandemic, even though it is still going on, that there can be a lot of efficiency from, like how you're saying, some cost saving structures with even where you work. Simply put, if you can get the job done and save, say, hundreds of thousands on real estate taxes, depending on where your business is located, I would think senior leadership would go ahead and agree with that.
Well, and again, you've got to pick the right things. Clearly, if you're in a manufacturing company, your manufacturing and operations are going to need to be where they are. And the big question is going to be for especially companies that have have primarily commercial real estate footprints, like professional services firms, technology companies, things like that, where there's a lot of office space. I think there's going to be some significant cost saving opportunities for companies and senior leadership teams who are willing to embrace either a hybrid work environment, or I know some companies who their leases were up and they didn't re-up their lease. They literally moved from commercial real estate footprint to a totally virtual environment. And they may decide at some point in time they need a hub in downtown Chicago or in the suburban areas, and they have a small space that's primarily for meetings and things like that, as opposed to anything else. And now you've got disruptive real estate players who, you can basically rent real estate and office space on an as-needed basis. So the good news about the pandemic is there's some really, really interesting situations in business where opportunities have been created for companies that are and can be disruptive in various markets and cost areas. And they're getting a lot different play today because companies had to figure out how do we get our people out of the office, and then all kinds of interesting things happened when they were successful doing that. And looking on the other side, there's going to be some companies that go back to their original real estate footprint. There's going to be companies that have no commercial real estate footprint, and they'll basically rent it as needed. And then there'll be a lot of companies that have some kind of hybrid program.
I would definitely agree. And I would think as a young professional that's coming into the workplace within the last 6 to 8 months, definitely having those social interactions in the workplace is definitely something that, it's kind of coveted and almost missed, I think, to some extent. So I think you'll start to see, like you said, maybe some hubs or those co-working spaces start to kind of take off. So to kind
You
of,
also have to think about, when you're looking at meeting and people and culture, and how do you develop a culture in a hybrid or a remote environment when you don't see your people every day. It's a little bit more challenging, but I think the basic premises are the same. You've got to lead, you've got to inspire your people, and it's going to take some different execution on the remote environment versus the in the office environment. The other thing that I think is really big from COVID that companies have had to wrestle with is in the remote environment, the need to protect data and communications is significantly different from when you've got your people in their four walls. And so I think, IT and chief information officers have been wrestling with that. The good news is they were forced to wrestle with it and figure it out. And so going remote doesn't necessarily mean that you're exposing the company's data and information in a way that is reckless, because the good CIOs have had time to figure that out. And there's now, IT consulting firms that are doing that now that didn't even have to do that before. So again, COVID's created some interesting situations where companies who are a little bit disruptive are in a position where they can now do some things that are going to be very interesting going forward.
Absolutely. I completely agree. So to kind of change gears a little bit, as a consultant, I'm sure you've dealt with a lot of negotiating, and this is, again, something that you kind of hold to your professional standards. You've talked about if you don't ask, you won't get it. So as a young professional coming into the workplace, there may be some things when you're applying for a job, and the typical one is the raise in salary, kind of determining your worth. Do you have any tips, maybe a trick or tip or two about negotiating?
Yeah, and to some extent, this is a generic response. It's always applicable, but you have to maybe home in on where it's going to be applicable. So, for example, everything is negotiable. So if you don't ask, and you never will get, but everything is negotiable to some degree. Your salary may not be negotiable when you're talking about coming on board, but maybe there's some non-compensation related things that are, especially if you're moving to another job and somebody really wants you Maybe you can negotiate a day or two work from home that you weren't thinking about before. Maybe you can negotiate some additional, if they can't give you more money, maybe you can negotiate an extra week of, PTO. Maybe you're in a position where, you can look at getting some equipment at home. And if they're willing to let you work from home for a couple, are they willing to buy, an extra computer or, do the kinds of things and let you invest in your home office so that you're as productive as you can be. Then again, salary is important. And I will say, the next thing I want to say is do your homework in every negotiation. So just because the company says they don't have any more money doesn't mean that's the case. You need to make your case in front of somebody. So do your homework, know what you should be or somebody in your position is being paid for that kind of role, either within that industry or elsewhere. And you can get a lot of that information, online. If you're working with a recruiter, you should be able to get some information there. And certainly for people who are, up and coming in, their careers, and maybe we'll get to this a little bit later, but get to know recruiters out there. They can be unbelievably valuable resources, for you going down the road. The other thing I would say about negotiating is one thing that is true, big companies, household names are usually always more expensive. You're paying for that name, you're paying for that reputation, and just recognize that when you go in. If you're looking for best optimal cost, you're almost never going to get it from the big name consulting firm, technology firm, whatever, and they tend to be less willing to negotiate. But again, there's always things that are negotiable. And so in doing your homework and knowing the marketplace, for example, in technology, you may not be able to get any better pricing on your software license, but what you may be able to get is credits for implementation. So if you keep asking for a better price, your salesperson may have his or her hands tied, and they may say, I'd love to help you, but I can't. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because somebody above them said, you can't do anything on the price. There's no discounting for whatever reason. And that could be something strategic. It could be, the senior leadership team wants to improve margins, so they're not going to give you that, but maybe they'll give you some credits for implementation. Maybe they'll give you additional seats at no additional cost, but they need a minimum amount in that number. And so once you hit that number, maybe then there's an ability to negotiate some additional kinds of things that you're not typically thinking about. And the challenge for most companies is they do those negotiations once in a blue moon. It's not like it's the product that they buy every day, which they know the cost of, or, and for a bank, the cost of funds every day. What you don't know is all the other stuff that the bank buys on a spot basis or whatever, and you don't want to reinvent the wheel. So use consultants that know the answer to the business of that particular situation, and never hire a consultant that doesn't know the answer.
I think that.
So did that hit the?
Hit the nail right on the head. Definitely some useful information for not only recent graduates and young professionals that will be listening to this, but I think also maybe some experienced professionals and FEI members as well. So thank you for that. But also kind of following along that path, do you have any advice or some guidance maybe towards individuals that are looking to, young or experienced professionals looking to get into whether it's cost savings or consultancy?
Yeah, I think the key skill, and it's hard for young folks and for middle career people and even for senior leadership people, is the best skill that you have is the ability and your comfort in asking questions. Sometimes you think you're supposed to know the answer to stuff, but you never want to find yourself in a situation where um, you don't ask enough questions to know what's expected of you. So, whether it's your first job and you're in your, early 20s, or you're in your middle career in your 30s or 40s, or you're at the senior level in an organization, people will remember you by the great questions that you ask. And one thing I can tell you for sure is nobody learns anything by talking. They only learn stuff by listening. And the precursor to listening is asking a question.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm learning that even currently. It's just simply, um, not trying to do too much, and not trying to force yourself to learn, because sometimes it's better to be taught, um, and ask and receive that knowledge, whether rather than, like you're saying, doing the talking, um, trying to overwork yourself and trying to stuff that knowledge in, because sometimes it just won't stick.
Right, right. And one
Um,
other thing I would add to that is um, mentors are really, really important, and they're important at every stage of your career. More so the earlier on you are in your career. So look for mentors both from a personal and life perspective, who may also be able to give you great career advice. But wherever you are and wherever you go, try and find somebody who is well regarded, looked up to, and respected in the organization, and seek out great mentor relationships either at the company that you're currently at, and when you leave and move somewhere, the same thing. Great company cultures will foster that, um, but it's a great sign for somebody to be seeking out that. And you don't want to just walk up to the CFO in a company, when you're a staff person and say, "Hey, would you be my mentor?" I mean, you don't have to do that, but you could certainly say, you know, if it's okay, I'd love to pick your brain and I'd love to hear, your story. How'd you get to this spot? Um, and start developing a relationship there. And if you develop the relationship, the senior person will kind of pick up the ball. And if you figure that out, then they're going to be able to figure out this is somebody that either I want to be mentoring or not. And both of those tell you something. But, if you come across well, great. And the other thing I would say to you and everybody else, and this goes whether you're in a selling position, if you're internal, if you're on staff, um, people like working with people that they like. It sounds trite, but it's really important. If somebody, you can be the smartest person in the world, and if the people that you work with and you're working for don't like you, you're not going to be long for that job. Because they'll find somebody who has the technical expertise. That's the easy part. The interpersonal side and the likability factor is unbelievably huge at every step of the way. So even in your first job coming off of campus, and in your first position at an organization, you want to be likable, and that doesn't mean kissing up to everybody. It's that you know how to have fun. You're not just kind of you speak up. You kind of commit and you participate. Obviously smiles are great, your facial expressions and your body language is important to all of that. And quite frankly, there's a lot of stuff online that's available that can help you out with some of those things. So take advantage of all of that, and then make yourself likable, and it will work. It works in your personal life. It's good to have friends. It's good to have people that you hang with. And the same thing happens on the career side and at a company, unless it's if you're a one-person show, obviously that's a little bit different. But in my case, we've got a boutique company. It's me and a partner, and we need our clients and our prospects to like working with us because we think we're smart, but there's a lot of smart people out there, right? And they can pick whoever they want to work with. They're going to pick the people who they believe can get the job done for them, either fix a problem, help them out with an opportunity, but they're going to want to enjoy doing the work with those people. It was more the case when you had face-to-face interaction, obviously, but it's equally important in the remote world. I mean, you can still be likable in a Zoom call or a Teams call or a WebEx call, just by, again, your body language and smiling, asking the right questions, and not necessarily making light of things, but lighten the environment up a little bit, set people at ease. And I think that'll come back in spades for everybody.
Yeah, that's Steve. That's great advice. I definitely would say I think a lot of, or I won't speak for a lot, but I would say most recent graduates are really worried about the technical side of their job. Maybe it is a lot, but I would think a lot of people come into their job worried about that technical aspect and almost forget about the interpersonal. So I completely agree. Working on,
well, and I don't want to downplay the technical aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got to have the requisite technical skills, or somebody has to believe that they can teach you, right? So the on-the-job training piece is important. But again, they're going to want to work with somebody that they like to teach them more than somebody that they really can't stand because, they're a jerk or, whatever you want to call them. People are going to gravitate to people that they like spending time with. And if you think about it, it's most important the higher up you are in your career. I mean, a CFO should pick a job, and they should stay in a job because they really like working with the CEO. They don't necessarily have to they don't necessarily have to like the CEO. They don't necessarily have to go out to dinner with the CEO, but they have to like every day, hours a day, interacting with that individual. And so you're spending a ton of time. And if you're spending a ton of time with somebody, wouldn't it be great if you enjoyed spending that time as opposed to, I can't stand spending time with this person? So it seems, again, it seems kind of oversimplified, but it's unbelievably important to like the people that you work with. It's almost more important than the company itself. I would say that a CFO who's in transition and looking for their next gig, the most important thing that they need to determine is, do they really like and can they respect the CEO? Because if they can't answer yes to that, they're not going to be happy at selecting that job. And it could be the perfect job for them. But there's so much interpersonal stuff that happens at every step of your career that the likability factor, and that's them liking you, but you also, flip that around. You have to enjoy going to work every day. And if you don't like the people that you're working with, and it's a pain in the neck, and you are dreading going to work in the morning, I mean, you don't want to put yourself through that day in and day out, week in and week out, month in and month out, and year in and year out. You want to get up and say, boy, I'm excited about going to work today. And that's a big combination of two things. It's the what you're doing when you're at work, and it's the who you're doing it with.
Absolutely. So to wrap this up, I want to ask you one final question, kind of following along the lines of maybe some tips or advice. If there's one thing that you could tell your younger self that you've learned, what would that be?
Wow. So I think it applies to almost any aspect of your career. If you're in business development, this may sound a little bit more, and it may resonate a little bit more, but if you think about it, even in your career, you're in business development mode no matter where you are in an organization. And the business development part is you. You're developing yourself, and you're hopefully putting yourself in a position to progress in your career or whatever. But from a business development standpoint, you can't sell anybody anything. It's all, everybody that you are talking to, if you're looking for and you need something from them, they are a buyer. You can never sell them. They're always in the buying mode. So you need to remember that, and you need to reflect on how do you persuade that individual that they should be buying from you or buying you, as opposed to, because they've got other options, right? And so you need to get to, if somebody's having a meeting with you, and you're in, let's say you're looking for a job, your first job, or you're in a job interview, whoever you're talking to, and again, it gets back to asking the right questions. If they're spending an hour of time with you, they've got something on their mind. So come out and ask. You can say to somebody, I know your time's really, really important. My time's important, but I know your time's really important, and we're spending time together. So what's on your mind? Why did you agree to spend an hour of time with me? Because if you can give me the answer to that, we can focus the rest of our time on addressing what's important to you, not me talking and telling you what I think is important about me.
Great advice. I think I think I'm lucky to be able to be here, as well as a lot of the viewers, to kind of hear all really the information that you've talked about today, but especially just remembering to kind of sell yourself and separate yourself as well from others. So, Steve, I'd like to thank you for everything today. And a lot of the information I think will be very valuable to the young professionals, recent graduates, as well as maybe experienced professionals, whether looking to get into consultancy or cost savings, or just interested in the talk in the interview series. I really appreciate your time as well.
Thanks, Liam. I enjoyed it as well. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.